Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure for the Spanish Solidaridad Trade Union to be with you today. Once again, let me express my delight we are very happy that we are able to cooperate with so many organizations. First of all, I would like to emphasize that Europe and the European Union are two completely different and distinct concepts. The EU, which was born to serve the survival of the nations of the continent, has become a globalist political entity that has completely renounced its historical identity. Therefore, all those who brand us as Europhobes or Eurosceptics for denouncing what the EU has finally become are all wrong. The EU, which was born as an economic union between sovereign nations after the Second World War, has become a bureaucratic superstructure that is made up of institutions that anyone chooses and whose sole purpose is the dissolution of national sovereignties and identities. From our perspective, Europe is much more than a dissolving supranational entity. We consider it legitimate to question many aspects of the EU. We conceive Europe as a historical and geographical reality that goes far beyond the treaties, federations, and ideological cultural impositions of globalism. Europe is a civilization that is perfectly defined by historical factors that no one should ignore, and that could be summed up in Greek thought or philosophy, in Roman civilization and law, and in Christian spirituality. Athens, Rome, and Jerusalem are the pillars that for centuries have sustained our civilization and that make up our identity. And it is an objective fact that Spain is part of this civilization unit, but not only because of its geographical position, but also because of its contribution to universal history through feasts such as the reconquest against Islam, of which both Hungary and Spain are a historical symbol of, the discovery and civilization of a new world, the verification of sphericity of the earth with the first circumnavigation of history, the defense of the Christian tradition, the literary, artistic, and philosophical creation, and the expansion of Spanish as a language that today more than 600 million people speak in the world. For this and for much more, our European identity, no matter how critical we may be with the globalist bureaucracy, cannot be doubted, questioned, and as I have already said, not only because of our geographical position, but also because we have fought for centuries for our identity, heritage, and civilization. Moreover, has also seen the birth of key ideas such as sovereignty, or the emergence after the French Revolution of what we know as nation-states. That said, it is clear that to make a calm analysis of the EU, we cannot abstract from history. Without the Second World War, we cannot accept notions as the ECSC, the EEC, the Euratom, the EU, and these institutions. The promise of peace and prosperity offered by the EU made most nations enthusiastically want to be part of the European bloc of nations that a few decades ago had been completely antagonistic. But that cooperation bloc, all those promises have turned out to be false. And for this, we only have to look at the nations that were once under the Soviet yoke, such as Hungary and Poland. The Spanish Socialist Party have destroyed our whole nations, but nevertheless, fishery, agriculture, etc., was dismantled just because of the interests of other nations. The compensation that we receive from the EU are grants, aids, so that they can fully undermine our productivity. So these supports, these grants, all serve political aims and intentions that fall out of the interest sphere of Spain. This attack or this policy is not only pursued by left-wing parties, but also by the European People's Party or the majority of the European People's Party. In Spain, we suffer from a collective anxiety. After the euro was introduced, the EU entered into free trade agreements that in the end somehow destroyed the production system and structure of Spain, exerting very negative impacts on the economy and especially on the world of labor. Slave contracts are very typical of Spain. Our producers cannot compete with countries such as South Africa or Morocco. So it is simply impossible for us. Furthermore, the EU looks the other way when the import quotas signed in these treaties are exceeded. I think that another fundamental aspect to understand what the EU means for the nations that make up its debt. Spain, after the 2008 crisis, was forced by Germany to acquire more debt to save investments and investors, thus entering a vicious circle in which we ask for a debt to pay off another debt for the previous debt, thus generating an unpayable interest. This debt, which today is over 120% of our GDP, represents an invasion of our sovereignty in every way. Cuts, guidelines, tax rates such as VAT or the self-employed quota are imposed on us. Why does the EU impose that our pensioners have to lose their purchasing power, and not the salary or the number of politicians not the salary of the politicians or their number is reduced? Obviously, because most of our politicians serve as a transmission valve for globalist interests, that interests prevent nations from developing, from growth. And this is what the Brussels bureaucrats seem want to see, who see nations and the prosperity of nations as competitors to trample and subjugate. In addition to that, all these problems is based or derived from a fundamental ideological and cultural subordination. The propaganda calls Spain as pigs or vagrants, and it has severe internal and external consequences. This propaganda, promoted and supported by our anti-elites and their propaganda media, produces an adverse effect on our national economy, alienates potential investors, creates uncertainty, generates more interest and indebtedness, and in the end completely devalues our economy. Mass immigration is another aspect, fundamental aspect that we have to deal with. EU authorities want the nation states to accept quotas, but it is a pretext. We are talking about economic immigrants, not people seeking political asylum or fleeing from armed conflicts. So these economic immigrants are part of a network that makes millions and millions of euros, billions of euros. The European Union tries to enforce this false solidarity on the member states by they trample on the sovereignties of the countries. Through the multiculturalist ideology, they simply alter the traditions and identity of these countries. Through this imposition of quotas, a global alliance is established. On the one hand, leftist progressivism imbued with good humor and endophobia. On the other hand, financial capitalism, which, displaying its immorality and its profit eagerness, introduces slave labor and reduces the working conditions of the workers. They have a desperate fight for profit. Disillusionment is turned into profit. There are solutions, but there are solutions which are difficult. We have to protect our workers. Our duty is to denounce that it is a planned migration invasion, substitution of the population, which will have negative effects in the end. It is a suicide of civilization. We have to promote life, birth, family. We have to protect our borders, our workers, our national economy, our culture, and our nation. We refuse the implementation of further projects that in the end will completely undermine the sovereignty of our nations, of our states, member states, and in the end will result in a United States of Europe. We define ourselves as patriots, and we would like to defend the model of voluntary cooperation. The situation in Spain in this regard is especially delicate, since our independence is not only threatened externally through or by supranational organizations, but also internally by separatist movements whose leaders, as you well know, find asylum in Brussels. Brussels accepts these Spanish leaders. Therefore, in the first place, we choose to defend the territorial unity of our nation. We have to protect our borders against these imposed migration flows. We have to defend our economy against the tyranny of large multinational companies and the global market. We have to revitalize our productive industrial fabric. We have to defend our sovereignty, our culture, our history, our identity, such as life and family. So, I would like to emphasize, we have to defend life and family. This is the most important. And this is exactly that we want for Spain. It is exactly what we want for the rest of the continent, as well as the establishment of voluntary cooperation relations on issues that affect us alike. But most of all, we have to preserve our sovereignty at all levels. We consider that to question the functioning of the EU policies, the ideological impositions, the impositions of immigration, the destruction of national economies and other practices that undermine the sovereignty of the nations is not anti-European. We want to preserve our civilization. They are governing. But for us, the most important is that we would like to govern on behalf and in the name of the people, because otherwise we will not be able to salvate Spain and the rest of Europe based on the same ideologies and traditions.